Hi, I'm Chrissy Mack from Radio Northern Beaches, and you've just tuned in to the Listen and Chat with Chrissy Mack podcast. This is the space where we pull no punches, sometimes a little controversial, sometimes downright outrageous, and sometimes just packed full of information that is interesting to know. What happens when we stop seeing outdoor spaces for children as equipment zones and start seeing them as places for learning, resilience, well-being and connection? This gives Urban Discovery, a Melbourne-based design, construction and consultancy company specialising in regenerative, therapeutic and play-based spaces, a strong conversation to unpack. Urban Discovery challenges the old ideas of the playground and reframes these spaces as children's gardens, outdoor classrooms and nature-rich learning environments. Are we underestimating what children learn when they climb, dig, build, plant, balance, imagine and explore? How about we create outdoor environments where children are encouraged to observe, take safe risks, solve problems, connect with nature and build confidence through hands-on discovery? Well, listeners, today I have on the phone with me Jenn Reed from Urban Discovery, and we're going to talk about the difference in the types of playgrounds and how they educate children. Hi Jenn, welcome to Radio Northern Beaches.
Hi, Christine. It's great to be here with you.
Now, we're going to talk about playgrounds because we're not looking at playgrounds in the fact that we stick a couple of slippery dips and something else to swing on. We're talking about real learning. Tell us about that.
Yes, look, it's interesting to think back that when I embarked on a career at the age of sort of 21, that 30 years of watching children play and following research would lead me here. But what I know is the narrative and definition of learning is really important and key here. We need to think about what that means for us. And humans are born with instincts, right? We have survival instincts within us. And when a child is allowed nature, immersive ecosystem, time, freedom of time, and allowance where the adult can step back just a little, sit under the tree and have a rest and watch, when we allow that complex concepts, story making and engineering, communication, problem solving, resilience, persistence start to come in. We call it play, but actually is it learning? I think it is.
I think it is. I mean, children learn so much at that particular age. I remember as a child climbing in the bush over rocks and, playing with butterflies and grubs and all sorts of things, but learning so much out in that environment.
It's absolutely critical. If you think about the memory making, the story capturing that we have, that we can come back and say, I remember when I was a child, this happened. If I'm sitting in a classroom and I've got some blocks in front of me and we're doing maths and the teacher says, put it on the scales and work out the weight of each of the blocks, that's something that I'm engaged with doing because I've been told to, but there's no story behind it for me. If I'm out in the yard and I find a beautiful Christmas beetle, we all remember finding those gorgeous Christmas beetles, right? And I watch it and I see that it's digging and it's going under and then I find its family. All of a sudden, my survival technique kicks in and I want to create habitat and shelter for my Christmas beetle. So I have to get a leaf and balance it, but it won't stand up on its own because it's not weighted to do so. So I need to find the right stick. So is that not the same complex concept that we're asking, but it holds a story for the child, which leads to memory?
That's right. Just simply being in a creek and building up the rocks or building a little dam or all that is learning about nature and how it works, but it's also mathematics, it's science, it's all sorts of things.
It is. I drive around Australia, all around the country, and I analyse the physical environments. And that's why I started doing landscape design and I moved to this direction from education, was because all I was seeing was asphalt trucks being backed up into the schools and then wondering why we were having to shorten lunch breaks because children's conflict was right on the rise. And I knew that there was a better way. And when I drive around and I see that what we've actually done historically is remove all of the nature, replace it with equipment and watch the research. I've been watching research for 30 years in this space. We now know humans benefit from nature. We don't need to to really delve into finding more of that. We know it. It's there. There's a body of work across the world. So now the change-making position that we find ourselves in is that we must invest in restorative, immersive ecosystems for children so that story making, that learning, that play, that child's work can take place.
Yeah, because you can't learn much other than gravity takes you from the top to the bottom. What goes up must come down on slippery dips, And yes,
right.
Okay, coordination is part of the slippery dips and the monkey bars and all that sort of stuff.
Yes.
But it's totally different to balancing across rocks and sticks and bits of timber and tyres and all that sort of stuff, which we used to do. And if we fell, we fell. I mean, I remember a friend of mine doing a study in kindergartens where they took in a whole lot of timber and tyres and all sorts of things and did a study for, I think, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, something like that in several kindergartens. And she said we practically had to tie the teachers down because they were so scared that the kids would hurt themselves because they were putting these pieces of timber up on seats and, walking down them. But as they watched, they started to settle because the kids would help each other and not fall. And if they did fall, well, they fell. They learned something.
Yes. Sometimes I think about the risk-hazard conversation that happens a lot. And we think that we need height in our playgrounds. And people get nervous because we're using logs and rocks. So how can I get this high climbing rocket ship kind of thinking? What happens to my child when they fall? But actually, I question the adult-centric thinking behind height because I believe if you create diverse, as you speak, like creeks, bridges, rocks and logs to leap on, things to sit around and gather as groups, the children will find robust movement in that. They will do parkour and leap and jump. They play a thing called lava. So you're not allowed to touch the ground. You've got to stay on the rock. And at all costs, you've got to leap across. And if you fall on the ground, then you're out of the game. And what we're doing there is we're creating risk and problem solving, but not a hazard, not a really high thing that I'm going to fall off.
Exactly. And I know, as kids, like I was born in 54, and so in the 50s and 60s, we had all sorts of accidents. We fell over, we scraped knees, we broke things, we did all sorts of things, but that experience taught us. And I don't expect or want children to fall over and break something, but, children find risk. It doesn't matter where they are. They will find risk if it's there.
Absolutely.
Because it's part of their learning process. And if they don't get that learning process, what happens is they grow up, these kids in cotton wool, they don't learn. And later on in life, they take unnecessary risks. And that's not a good thing.
Yeah, look, it's such an overarching theme, but I look at land stewardship, right? And children will bring play into everything. If you build a conservation area, they will play in it. And when people are engaging in nature, children, and they learn to care for it, so they might be playing chasey with their mates, and they come across an insect and they start caring for it. They start to understand their seasons and their land. When that becomes part of the risk for themselves, the caring for country, the caring for self, I think that they've got a problem solved, and so the resilience is there. Whereas if I'm in a structured playground and I climb up the ladder, I do it every day when I go to school. I'm bored, I'm going to go on the roof of the cubby house. It's at the top of the structure.
Oh,
because
definitely.
That's my extension. And so then we've got inappropriate use of a design piece and a height that's not designed for it. Children falling, breaking limbs. I went to a primary school in Victoria and they had two very distinct areas, traditional playground and a huge nature play space, which was part of permaculture, food growing, all the things. They mapped the children and the injuries in the two areas for 2 years. There was 0 injuries occurred in the nature play space. It was still very high and big and robust. And all of their injuries occurred mainly on monkey bars, but on that fixed equipment.
Yeah, that can be quite dangerous at times. But as I said, we grew up with it. We learned, yes, we did break bones from time to time. And as I said, we don't want anybody to do that. But those experiences taught us.
They did, yes. I think there's, you think about your teenagers and you want to make sure that they've explored and problem solved and challenged their way through things so that we don't see it when they're 15. And I think being able to move stuff builds that. I've worked in schools where we bring in loose parts and the kids can build their own shelters and create their own worlds. And these things go on for years. I know stories where kids have gone back to their school as adults to see the tree that they used to climb and the shelter that they created, this world and tribe that they created for themselves. So there's so much complex thinking around that and risk-taking.
There is. Now, you were telling me that you actually work with children and they help you build the playgrounds. Tell me about that.
Yeah, that's right, Christine. We're always looking for places to empower children, and there's a real sense of worth that comes from being heard. And so our co-design model says students are part of the stakeholder group at all points. And I was working in a school and we were given the blind side of the oval, so they've had a new oval put in, and it's quite often the fringe of the oval just gets neglected. I see those places as just the magic in the school. And so we were given this small section and a group of students. And I'm not really ever told the history of the students. I just arrive and start working with them, which I love. And we were working away, and over the course of sort of 6 months, I came in every Tuesday and would work with the kids, and we started to build the garden and grow plants for it and get logs and all the things. And after a period of time, there was a student called Emily, and she hadn't said very much. I didn't know that Emily was nonverbal at school. She started talking to me in my garden group with her. And, there was a lot of things that happened following those sessions where there was some tomatoes that grew under the fence, and Lucy picked them and she put them on the log, and it looked a bit like a shop. And one of the kids came up and said, "Hey, Lucy, can I buy a tomato off you?" She said yes. And that was the first time I'd heard her talk. And from that time, the other kids knew that Emily knew lots about bugs. So she would say, "Can you go find me a bug and I'll give you a tomato?" And there was this exchange. Emily then went on she really started to thrive at school, and she went on to work at the Melbourne Fear Company making masks. And she has just been part of the production company for Memoirs of a Snail, and she makes tiny little invertebrates and insects out of clay that are used in animated movies. So, I like to think that my little garden group with Emily did that for her. I will never know, but that's okay.
It's just incredible.
So many stories like that, Christine, where I can remember, there's just decades of stories in me about a particular child. And you don't forget, it changes who you are really when you're working with them.
All right, let's talk about how you develop these areas and what type of thoughts and what type of equipment you use as far as natural equipment to create these spaces.
When I was working in education, I worked in early learning, and there's lots of complex sites that I worked in, lots of family dynamics that were challenging. And I could see that there was no budget. Schools and kindergartens, particularly at the moment, are having to be really creative with their resources. And so I found myself trying to learn a trade and looking around to see what other people in my immediate school community had trade skills. So that's the first place that I start is, have I got a builder? Have I got a plumber? Have I got someone, an arborist that is a parent at the school? And then I would set a working bee date and choose one zone. Don't think of the whole school. So I got the fire evacuation plan because that gave me the boundary of the school. And I broke it into zones, and I thought about the type of play I wanted to create. Did I want a restful, peaceful place, or did I want a place where children can build? And I would handpick, if you like, my parents and say, I know that person's going to be really resourceful. I'm going to give them a call and tell them what my plan is. So I'd sit down and go, all right, what do I want to create? I want to create a hut building, loose parts forest. So I need plants. I need some sticks and timbers. Oh, sticks, they're a bit dangerous. What are we going to do there? So I developed this model where it said no stick that could fit into an eye socket was allowed in the wild place, but everything else big enough. I could hurt my friend, but I couldn't poke their eye out. So I found ways to make it safer. I didn't just put everything in all at once because the kids, the excitement is huge. You've got to stagger this out and set some boundaries with the students so that things don't go crazy. I have had rocks get thrown over the fence into the ladies' swimming pool. So you've got to, then I started getting bigger rocks that needed 2 kids to lift. so they could create their own creek. It doesn't have to be elaborate. I just went to trade suppliers, garden supply places. I found if I heard a chainsaw, my kids know chainsaw means potential logs, and I would find an arborist that was cutting down, say, a storm-fallen tree, force it into the back of my Commodore. I've now got a ute, so that's pretty exciting. And I would force it into the back of my car, and the only limitation I had was if I couldn't carry it. So whatever I could carry could go in, and I would go and create spaces at school that were really simplistic. It doesn't have to be elaborate. And then it's just gone from there. So now I've got upwards of sort of 30 people that do building and projects around, and I've got teachers that work with us and Indigenous guides, and it's just grown because, you know, I'm extremely excited by this work, and I think it makes a difference, and I love having a collective of people that come with me.
I like hearing that you've got Indigenous people involved as well.
Condition of land, like everything for me, comes from that place. What is our Indigenous condition? What is the story of this land? What is the land telling us? Design from there, restore your school, bring it back, and you will see habitat within days. I've tested it. You will see invertebrates and other creatures coming within days of restoring and building in biodiversity. You know, we know that our gut biome needs exposure to biodiverse foliage. We know that. There's huge amounts of research around it. It's the reasons why we're all being allergic to things and finding these other medical responses that are required comes back to biodiversity. And for me, creating immersive ecosystem that includes the child, you know, don't create a garden bed and then put a fence around it. Create a program where you buy your seedlings cheap, grow them at school so you've got a hort program going. When they're big enough, put them in the ground and trust the kids to look after them. And you're probably going to lose some. But, you know, I don't plant anything smaller than a prep.
What about pushback from the parents? Oh, but what about the spiders, and what about the things that, you know, snakes and things that might bite?
Yeah, okay. So it's place-based design. We might work out in areas where there are snakes. So I'm not going to put big logs and cubby houses that have got nice little cosy nooks for snakes to be. I'm going to perhaps make it a little more enclosed, and we can prune for the environment. So if I want to put in a forest, but I know that there are snakes, then perhaps I'm going to remove some of the foliage from the ground up a metre or so. Still going to have that biodiversity around the children. I'm not going to plant lots of grasses. I want to be able to have a clean site. And a risk assessment, it is a really useful tool, looking at what do we do every day in that area? How do we teach our children to be snake aware? You know, making sure you make noise when you're heading in. Don't surprise any little creatures that might be there. So there's lots and lots of ways that we can mitigate those sorts of risks.
You've got a website that I noticed. I went and had a look. It's got video on there that shows what you're talking about, which is a really interesting little video, by the way. So tell us about your website and give us the address, and tell us what other information we can find on there.
Sure. So urbandiscovery.com.au, and on there I really wanted to create a place where teachers and parents could go and find a bit of a story, understand where I've come from and how we've developed as a collective, but also take some tools away. There's some do-it-yourself kind of how do I build my own space information in there. And so our team is really, we've got this new thing called the Bowerbird Project, and it's looking at engaging with us. So it's contacting us, having a chat about what your budget might be. It could be $1,000, it could be $10,000, but have a chat with us so we can come to your school, have a look around and go, hey, we think you can activate it this way. Have you got an arborist? And we just try and bring together your resources and be a bit of a project manager for you, but leaning into your skill set that you have in your community and bolstering it where it's needed. So it's a really bespoke kind of way of us collecting the Bowerbird to create these small spaces of play. So have a look on there, and there's also some research that help backs it up, lots of different sort of passages of inquiry that we've tried to allow people to see.
Well, I'm really excited about this because, as I said, I come from the 50s, 60s, 70s where we grew up in that sort of environment, and I loved being out in the bush and just, and we had no protections there. There were snakes, there were spiders, and we just dealt with it. But it's great to hear that we're heading back in that direction. So thanks for talking to us today, Jenn. I really appreciate appreciate your time and good luck with heading down this track.
Thank you so much, Christine. It was really great to connect with you on this.
What an eye-opening conversation with Jenn Reed from Urban Discovery. It really makes you pause and rethink how we build spaces for our kids. When we stop viewing the outdoors as just a collection of plastic swing sets and metal equipment zones and start seeing them as living, breathing classrooms, everything changes. A pile of rocks becomes a lesson in physics. A garden bed becomes biology. And the open dirt becomes pure creative problem solving. It's all about letting our kids explore, learn, and just be. They're so wrapped up in cotton wool these days. Well, that's it for this week. Don't forget to follow, like, and share, and I'll catch you next time.